G'day everyone, welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory with my co-host Joe Pearson. As always, today joined by CheeseheadTV, ATB Network and Risendraft writer Brian Maafi. Brian, really lovely to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so today we're kind of going to go just through, the edge class. We're going to talk about what's, the state of the team and how do we feel about edge on the team as it is. Joe, where are you at as far as what we have on the edge here?
I think I'm at the same point we were last year, where we have a solid starting group, but the edge depth is kind of out there. I mean, obviously the big question mark is going to be how's Rashawn Gary going to come back from the injury? When is he going to come back from the injury? I guess the secondary question would be, is Preston Smith going to be on the team still? I mean, the Packers are in kind of cap hell right now. So is he going to be on there? Is he going to be on the team? Are they going to restructure? What are they going to do with him? And then after that, you got our guy Kingsley, but then you don't have much after that. So, I mean, even if at this point, I have a feeling they're going to have to bring in at least one guy from free agency, not like a big name, but at least a rotational type guy. And they're going to have to at least draft one, whether it's a, top pick or if it's a mid-rounder, but, just to gain some depth for when an injury pops up. So, yeah, it's like I said, I'm at the same point as I was last year, where it's great having we know who our starters are, but after that, there's a giant question mark.
And Brian, what do you think about this team as far as what they have in the outside linebacking core?
Yeah, pretty much the same as Joe. I mean, they're going to need more depth just because you need rotational guys. Kingsley is probably better off as a number 3. But I mean, if starting off the year, if we go with what we have, basically he's a starter. But he's better off at 3. And then there's basically not much else on the roster besides him and Preston. And then of course Gary's going to miss probably at least the first 6 weeks. So they're going to need at least a couple guys just to get through until Gary's back, and it's the general depth that they need.
Yeah, and this free agent class is not really that great either. So I think they're going to have to lean heavy into the draft. They're going to have to take at least 2 or 3 guys in this draft. Yeah,
it's kind of a Goody thing. He usually takes at least 2-3 guys at a position weakness or position he's helping at, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's a really good class to kind of get someone who is not necessarily an immediate starter. There's a lot of these guys who kind of need to work a bit more on the refinement and kind of the hand fighting. But that's kind of, it's good because once Gary is back and we have both Preston and Gary, it's a great kind of duo to learn from and kind of planning ahead for the next 2 years, because Preston will likely be gone next year. So it'd be good to have someone who can eventually fill in that full-time number 2 role, and someone who actually brings a lot of physicality to the position, because I think a lot of the times in this team we kind of get good starters and then they just kind of settle and they don't really try to push to keep improving like a lot of the other teams.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, last year was kind of the first time that Preston had a weird career, where it was always one year he was great and the next year he was down, and then but last year was the outlier where he had 2 solid years in a row. So, and then Rashawn kind of reminds me of the Clay Matthews, where he's this freak athlete. He's getting the sacks, he's getting the numbers, but he's not getting help from the other side. So it would be really great to get somebody in there to match with him. And I agree with Brian, with what Brian said earlier, and that could have been even before we started recording, that this draft class for edge could be one of the best ones so far.
Yeah, no,
pretty
sure.
well. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So, no, yeah, sorry, you go. Yeah. Or you know.
No, go ahead, you're good.
So yeah, I mean, how where exactly would you want to see Green Bay kind of start drafting this position? I mean, like how big of a need and how urgent do you think they should kind of attack this?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of variables that go into that. I mean, obviously, if you're looking here when you're picking at 15, you're picking. It's more. It's more kind of best player available, but not exactly. I mean, it's kind of always a misnomer that people think it's like teams follow 100%. No team follows that 100%. I mean, if you have two really good quarterbacks, you're not going to draft them a quarterback 15. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. But even still, like with how the class looks like it's shaking out, and how the first round's been shaking out, probably that's their best option at 15 to be either like an offensive tackle or maybe a defensive lineman or an edge rusher. And so I would say possibly in the first round, second round, third round, fourth round, fifth round, whatever round, basically.
I'm kind of in agreement. Obviously the BPA is what Goody likes to put out to the press that they do, but like we were kind of talking in another episode, the Packers always seem to take a position a year ahead of what they needed. So, with the question marks going into next year, 2024, I could see them going edge early just so they have that guy there for when they prep to do whatever they want the following year. And I'm kind of repeating myself, but with the way the edge class is rolling out, I mean, they could theoretically get an edge starter in the mid to late rounds because that's just how deep this class is.
Absolutely, and like when you think the guys that even just in kind of the day two, I mean, guys like Keon White, Mike Morris, Will McDonald, BJ Ojolari, which I don't think is necessarily Packers type, but yeah, there's just so many names that you can just kind of rail off here, and it seems like the kind of best value is concentrated in that kind of 30 to 50 range, I think, and yeah, I think. Unless we can get really one of these premier guys on day one, it's kind of hard to justify drafting that second tier of edge rusher at 15. But if the Packers want to go for another Georgia defender, or if they believe that someone is physically talented enough that they can mold almost like they did with Rashawn Gary, I guess we just kind of have to trust them.
Yeah, like I said, this free agent class is kind of just kind of going through things is kind of worthless. So. They definitely are going to have to rely on the draft or whatever they want to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first question I kind of want to ask you, Brian, about this class is who is your, after the big three, Will Anderson, Miles Murphy, Tyree Wilson, from the second tier, who do you think is the best player that Green Bay could realistically get?
Probably as far as it fits them and what they type of guys like. They like to get the bigger guys, the guys with long arms, and the guys that are power rushers, guys that can play the run, stuff like that. So the type of guys that fit that they could possibly take a state team would be Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame or Luca Van Ness from Iowa.
I'm glad you said that and brought it up to open up the conversation on him. Obviously I'm a big Iowa guy. I'm a Hawkeye through and through. I'm really surprised at all the first round talk on Van Ness. And he's a good player, don't get me wrong, but I don't see the first round talent with him. And I think we go through, as a Hawkeye fan, we go through this every year where there's this one player that, oh yeah, he's great. I remember back, 5-6 years ago with Josh Jackson. Everybody was for sure Josh Jackson was going to be a first round pick. And I kept saying, guys, he's very limited. Iowa runs a certain defense, and I don't think this guy can transition. I think he's better off being taken in the 5th round and being, a role player. And they took him in the 2nd, and we know what happened from there. And I'm not saying Lucas Van Ness is the next Josh Jackson, but I think he's limited in what he did. Nick, I think we're just going to go ahead and jump into talking about the draft guys because I have some notes on Van Ness, and I might as well just start going with them as soon as I find the right page. He has a good motor. Of course, every guy for Iowa always seems to be this high motor guy because they're playing. It's like they're playing for their life. He's got a first good step, and one thing I always watch for edge rushers is that quick step off the line. If they've got that, then they're pretty set on whatever else they can do. He tracked the ball well. He did play a little bit too upright, in my opinion. It seemed like he was more standing straight up. And if once he gets in the league and goes against some of these veteran tackles, they're going to knock him on his ass. So that's something he's got to work on. He did play both standing upright and his hand in the dirt, so that's a positive because the Packers do a lot of that stuff. He did do some coverage, but it was kind of like putting Preston Smith in coverage. So, it wasn't great, but, theoretically he could do it. Good strength, and I don't know if he's got great speed, so I kind of put him in the Preston Smith role where he's going to be more of a strength rusher than he is a speed rusher. But, I see what there is to like about him. I just, seeing him being talked about as high as even 15 or I've seen him mocked at like pick 8, and it just kind of boggles my mind.
Yeah. And it's hard because, I guess he didn't have that much experience in college, right? He was never really starting for that team. So it's really hard to kind of project. And with a lot of these guys, I think you're kind of looking at that kind of transformation going into the NFL. Brian, what exactly is that you like about guys like Lucas Van Ness or like you said, Foskey?
Well, like I said, they're the Packers type of guys. Like I said, they're big guys. They're bigger guys. Packers like the bigger guys, 260 plus or 260-ish plus. They got long arms. They play with a good power profile. They can play the run. The Packers like those type of guys. They're like guys who can use the long arm, guys who can use bull rush, guys who can use speed to power, and those guys can definitely do that. Especially there's even that one rep that went around Twitter of Luka against Paris Johnson, who's probably OT1, where he just basically shoved him back into the lap of Stroud. So he's got the power profile, which the Packers tend to like. So
yeah,
he's their type of guy. He really just needs to work on his counters, adding on different pass rush moves into his bag, stuff like that. So, and then being able to string moves together and stuff like that is what he needs to work on.
Right, and I saw a lot of that too, where he could bull rush and he had a hell of a punch when he was using the bull rush, but once he got caught, he was kind of stuck. So, yeah, he's got to work a little bit on that too. But again, as an Iowa guy, I'm not going to complain if the Packers take an Iowa player. So, it just kind of surprises me that he's getting the talk that he is.
Yeah, well, in the first round, and like especially there, you're looking at guys projecting where they can be in a year or two, not necessarily where they are right now. So.
Sure. Talking about guys who are kind of going on a lot of projection, how do you feel about Andre Carter from the Army?
He's the proverbial ball of clay, dude's 6'6", he was Senior Bowl, he measured like 250, something like that. But he's long, he's got these long arms, long legs. He's got the frame to pack on another 10, maybe even 20 pounds, without losing any athleticism. And the funny thing, one of my Twitter buddies brought up the other day I had forgotten about, but people look at him and think he's so small is because Army has specific weight standards where you can't get over a certain weight because it's not fitting to the uniform. That's why he had to keep his weight down. So he's going to bulk up probably pretty quick. But he's like I said, he's crazy long and he's athletic. He's bendy. He's crazy bendy for a guy that's like 6'6". It's surprising. And then even when you watch the cut-ups of him, his film, there's times Army asked him to actually drop some coverage, and he moves like a dude that's like 6'2", 230. He was moving and able to hips and turn and run. I wouldn't have him covering a receiver or anything like that, obviously, in the NFL. But it just shows how athletic he is.
Yeah, I really liked him. Now, the big question I had, and I don't know it, is there still the restriction on guys coming from the military academies where they have to sit out for a while before they can...
there sort of is, but I guess they worked it out for him, for Andre Carter. And going down from now on, there might be an issue. It sounds like maybe, but I guess they somehow worked it out for Andre.
Okay, yeah, I knew there for a bit. All of them, the Naval Academy and all that, where they had the restriction where they had to finish out their service before they could be declared. So I didn't know if they fixed that or whatever. I know there was talk that they were going to be doing something like that, because I really liked what I saw out of Andre Carter too. So and you know, I've seen him mocked all over the place. I've seen him at the end of the first. I've seen him, you know, all the way down to the third and all that stuff. So, you know, I really liked what I saw out of him too. There's another one that Nick has on our show notes that I'm surprised you put at day 2, because I kind of thought he could probably sneak into day 1, and that's Derek Hall out of Auburn. I really liked what I saw out of him too. You know, I thought he was strong and he had good hand usage. You know, I saw often a lot that he was doing the Clay Matthews hand slap, and I thought that was pretty cool that somebody's actually bringing that back. He was very disrupted. He looked like he had good speed. And like Brian said about Lucas Van Ness against Paris Johnson, you know, Derek Hall pretty much ate up the Alabama tackles. And, you know, Alabama always has, you know, a great offensive line, and he was just feasting on those guys all day long. And, you know, the only critique that I really saw that jumped out to me is he didn't have a great bend. He probably could dip a little bit lower in his bend, and if he does that, I think he could be an amazing prospect. So I could see him being the type of guy that could sneak into the first round.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think with a lot of these guys with those kind of like big, massive frames, I think you know, because like at the end of the day, it only takes one team, right? So you know, I can definitely see a lot of these guys moving around a lot, and it's really difficult to project a lot of this without the combine, right? So
right.
Yeah, but you know, it's so difficult at this stage of kind of the draft process. As far as, you know, day 2 kind of guys in that second and third round, who are you looking at, Brian?
I can put in there's a bunch of guys. I think Derek Hall probably is more of a day 2 guy. Yeah, guys like Zach Harrison, he'd be a good day 2 guy. He fits kind of like what the Packers like, you know, 6'5", 60+, you know, kind of can be a little on the stiff side, but you know, they're the type of guy, fast, athletic, all that. He fits them.
So we're kind of having some technical difficulties here. We're just going to carry on for a little bit, and then hopefully Brian joins us back soon here. Kind of going through these day 2 targets, you know, round 2 and 3. One of the guys I was really interested in, who, you know, is again one of these like really high caliber athletes, is Keon White from Georgia Tech. I think just like a very, you know, like a lot of these guys, very physically talented. And, you know, edged on one of those positions where the physicality matters so much. And you know, depending on where you look, he's like 6'4", 6'5", anywhere in between like 270 and 290. But you see it on the tape. I mean, the guy is just like humongous and, you know, strong, but he still has that kind of, yeah, like the slipperiness and the oiliness in his hips. You know, I think he's a guy that could be, you know, yeah, like a very like, you know. At 45, I think he's definitely like a good target for this team.
Sorry about that.
So you were talking about, guys that you were looking at on day 2. Where are you at with that?
Oh, so yeah, like I don't know if you guys heard me. Zach Harrison, and then Felix and Suzuki Umaze. I know he pronounced it wrong. And then also, a guy who's kind of a day 2, so I say 3 guy. I kind of like is Yaya Diaby from Louisville. They all kind of fit what the Packers are looking for.
Yeah, I watched a little bit on Yaya, and I think he slots more into the defensive end type for the Packers. But yeah, he definitely had some flashes there. I'm surprised you didn't bring up your boy from LSU. We were kind of going back and forth on DMs. Where you like one and I kind of like the other one better. So, do you want to talk about BJ Ojulari?
Oh yeah, I love Ojulari. I just don't think he's really their Packers type unless he puts on, you know, 15 pounds or whatever between that combine, or shows up combine like 65. But I love him a lot. I like him a lot. He reminds me, his skill set reminds me a little bit of Clay Matthews in that he's really fast, he's explosive, he's super bendy. He plays hard. He plays like his hair is on fire, like Clay Matthews did. Somewhat similar size to Clay Matthews. So he just reminds me a lot of Clay Matthews, but I'm kind of iffy on whether he fits their size profile.
And see, I saw a lot of that too. But I thought, like we kind of mentioned with Lucas, that he needed to work on his pass rush moves a little bit more. He kind of half-hearted some of his pass rush moves, so I don't know if that was just him, messing around or whatever. But, I just have it wrote down here that maybe he needs to fine-tune him a little bit. But I kind of like the guy playing opposite of him a little bit better, that Ali Gay. I thought he had a quick first step. He had a good initial punch on his bull rush. I thought his motor was pretty relentless. I thought he needed to get lower. He, again, like Lucas, kind of got shot upright a little bit more. He had good strength. Maybe didn't have a lot of straight line speed, but he was quick enough. So he's definitely not going to be a guy that's going to chase anybody down, but he's going to be kind of, again, in that Preston Smith mold where he's going to bull rush the hell out of you.
Yeah, Alligay definitely fits their size profile. He's like 6'6", 265, something like that.
Yeah,
so,
he's a bigger guy too, so yeah.
Yeah.
One guy that I did watch that I haven't seen anything on, so I don't know if I'm just kind of grasping at straws here, but it's a kid out of Penn State, Nick Tarburton. I was really surprised I haven't been hearing much out of him. At first, I thought maybe I was watching somebody for next year's film, but it pulled up in the 2023 prospects because he was fast. I thought he had good hand usage. He might not be the strongest, and he needed to get a little bit lower in his bend, but I couldn't believe how fast he was moving. I mean, he moved like a safety at the edge position, and he was just all over the field. So I think he could... I again, without knowing what the combine does, and that, I could see him being a late round guy that is going to immediately produce in the league.
I haven't run to him yet. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't heard anybody really talk about him, so I don't know if anybody's really watched him or not, but I just happened upon him the other night while I was going through my YouTube feed, and he really popped off the screen for me.
Yeah, it's funny with it's like with kind of a lot of these positions, like how kind of restrictive the Packers kind of like physical profile is, and whether or not that's for the better, I guess it kind of depends on case by case. But I think that was kind of a big restriction for me when I was looking at a lot of these guys. Just in kind of seeing as Brian said, they really look for that kind of larger frame and guys with like a lot of strength. Someone that I was kind of interested in like the later rounds, Viliami Fehoko from San Jose State. He's the guy who's like, exactly, kind of like almost like the kind of like forklift type of guy, really like violent, persistent, kind of. Maybe lacking a little bit of that kind of like, finesse and like hand usage and things like that, but such a people mover, and I think he's a guy who can really kind of set the edge, with a little bit of fine tuning from the coaching staff. I really wish we still had Mike Smith on the defensive staff because he was such a great coach for a lot of these guys that we had before. But yeah, I think that's one of the guys that I really liked for like a day 3 kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of the late round guys that I looked at was, I know, Nick, you were kind of liking the one edge rusher from Georgia, Nolan Smith, and he's going to be more of a day 2, day 3 guy. But the guy opposite him, Robert Beal Jr., I think he could be more of a day 3 type. He had good hand usage. He was quick off the snap, good bull rush. He was driving tackles back. He had good strength. I don't think he was straight line fast, but he had good quickness to him. The one, and I laugh because I know I'm the one that wrote this note, but it's still kind of a funny note. He had kind of a waddle to him. You might not remember the game because you're too young, Nick, but Brian might be around my age. It was an old Nintendo game called 10-Yard Fight. And the guys if you ever get a chance, go on YouTube and see if they have any old clips of that or whatever. The guys in that game had a waddle to them instead of a run. And this Robert Beal had that to him to me. But, he had played coverage, and I said he might not be the most talented, but I think he could be in the Kingsley Enagbare role where, he's not the highest talent, but he's going to be a producer. So, but I think he's also going to be a mid to late round guy.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, before you have to head off here, is there anything that you want to kind of plug for yourself? Anything you're working on that you want us to kind of highlight?
Just, my writing stuff I do at ATB Network, of course. I do mostly just regular kind of pure draft stuff, but also throw in the Packer stuff here and there. I'm updating my, what do you want to call it? I guess my Packers threshold for the athletic threshold. Updating the article about it. But I wrote one up about 3 years ago, so I'm updating that. I'm going to put that out soon. And then also just, the draft database I do with Risendraft. We update that pretty much daily. So, you guys check that out. And then also just the CheeseheadTV draft guide. I'm working on that. I'll be doing the kickers, and I'm also writing a special feature article for the draft guide.
Yeah, awesome. Quickly before you go, actually, what do you think the Packers thresholds are for edge? Like, if you could give like rough measurements and things like 3-cone, etc.
I don't have the numbers on me right now. I have my database sheet that has all the numbers. But basically, it's just high RA scores because Goody likes the super athletic edge rushers. Usually 8+, not always, but usually. He likes guys that are 6'4" to 6'6". And then, of course, like I said before, around 260+, 260, 270. And then just guys who have good agility scores and good speed scores. Explosion scores, like the vertical jump, that's not super important as long as they're at least kind of like average-ish. But usually, like speed scores and agility scores, they really like.
Yeah, awesome. That definitely will be a big kind of good way to kind of define where they're going to be targeting these players after the combine happens later this month.
Oh, and also arm length too. They like guys around 34 or just around that range, 34 arm length.
Yeah. Joe, is there anything else you want to talk about with Brian before he has to head off?
No, I think we got what we had a pretty good conversation, some technical hiccups, but Brian, I appreciate you coming on. I look forward to getting you back on at some point and doing some more talk. Me and Nick are talking about doing something for the draft itself. So, if we can get something figured out, maybe we can get you in for a few minutes and talk during draft night. But I appreciate it. Be safe. And I look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Good chat. Thanks, guys. Write me on.
Thanks, man.
All right, buddy. Later.
So yeah, that was Brian Maafi, writer for CheeseheadTV, ATB Network and Risendraft, like you said. With this draft class, is there anything else you kind of want to cover? I just think it's kind of funny because, like I mentioned at the start, it seems like so much of this talent is just concentrated in that real like 30 to 70-ish kind of, like that, or 30 to 90, that they like. Round 2 and round 3, I think, is really where you're going to get the most value out of a lot of these guys because so many of them are just, like these real toolsy, physical, athletic guys who just need more refinement. That was kind of the thing that I found.
I think that everybody thinks that every year. Obviously, rounds 2, 3, and 4 are where people try to pick up their blue chip prospects. So, but you're always going to have that random in the first round that everybody thought he was a, third or fourth round guy, and somebody's taking him in the first round. I mean, there's some guys that I looked at that have a lot of talent, but I think their size in that is going to hurt them. Nolan Smith was one of them. Will McDonald was the other one. I mean, I know McDonald's having a pretty good time at the Senior Bowl, and his stock could rise in that. But when I was going through their stuff, I think Will McDonald barely taps out at like 235 pounds, and Nolan Smith was like 238. So they're definitely going to have to put up some bulk. But, it's like I said before, is putting on the bulk going to hurt their abilities? I mean, just going from Packer experience, AJ Hawk was the same way. He was an explosive player in college, and he thought he was going to have to bulk up in the pros. So he bulked up, put on like 15 or 20 pounds, and it zapped all of his ability. So he didn't look like he did in college. So, I think that's another thing that's going to be a cautious look at some of these guys coming out. They're smaller, so are they going to be able to pack on that bulk and still produce? But, like I said early on in the episode, I think the Packers are going to have to pull off one of their multi-dips into the edge rushing pool, and it'll be interesting. I know there's another guy from Iowa, John Wagner, that possibly could be a late-day guy. So, it's really hard to. We're doing the draft stuff, I know, relatively early, but we planned it around like the Senior Bowl and stuff. But a lot of it's going to be, a lot of the stuff to get into will be more after the combine, when you can get some actual numbers, and like Brian kind of mentioned, the RAS scores. So
it's very difficult to project, like, in terms of like mock drafts and all that kind of business. It's like, it's very difficult to project where these guys are going to go, because like we mentioned with earlier with Sarah, it's like the athleticism doesn't matter until it does, right? Like, you can't, it's about hitting like the base threshold and kind of knowing that these guys are on the baseline level to compete. And I mean, like the perfect example was like Ja'Kai Polite, was it 2 years ago now? Like, someone that I thought was really interesting, maybe could kind of overcome that smaller frame, and just absolutely bombed the combine and it fell like 5 rounds or something like that. It's difficult because it's like that can be like, the combine can be the thing that defines these guys' draft position. I mean, just look at Trayvon Walker last year, and at the same token, it can tank people. So
most definitely.
Yeah, it's funny because it's very silly to draft people just based on the athleticism, but it's the NFL. It's a physical league. Like that's half of your job is just being like a strong human, athletic humans. You can't you can't compete without that, especially at edge when you're facing against these other big men.
Well, and see, the Packers have one from both sides. Rashawn Gary didn't really produce in college, but he had a hell of a RAS score. And look at him now. And then on the flip side, Kingsley didn't have a very good RAS score. And then look at what he did for the Packers. So it's a one in one hand and, type of thing just to go off of. But, and like I mentioned in the Sarah episode, I don't pay attention more to the combine except for the 40 times. Because, the 40 time doesn't necessarily show what they can do on the field, but it gives you an idea if they've got enough speed to be able to handle. If you got a wide receiver that is tremendous in college, can, make the catches, can, run the routes, but then he gets to the combine and runs a 5 flat, he's not going to be able to produce in the NFL because he's not going to be able to separate from the top end talent. So it's kind of the same with any other position. You take an edge guy and he's flying around on the field, but then he comes in the combine and runs a 4.9 40. Is he going to be able to produce in the NFL?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
I think yeah, the biggest ones for me are vertical jump, broad jump for wide receivers, like 10, 20 yards split, I think is a really big one. And three cone, obviously. I think if you can get these guys like a sub 7 three cone, I think that's really, really good.
yeah, and I know that's what Goody kind of looks at too. Is if you ever watch a lot of or check out a lot of his draft picks, they tend to have good three cone times.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I think I want to really want to talk about here, especially with this kind of edge group, is all year we talked about this, the lack of leadership and the lack of drive, passion, blah blah blah, juice, whatever you want to call it. Some of these guys on this list, my favorite guys in this list, are all guys who are also massive leaders and integral to the success of their team emotionally and as motivators. And I think Rashawn Gary is kind of that guy, but I don't know how much he's doing that. I mean, he's only kind of just recently become a big time starter. But if we can get more of these really high character guys who, they're not necessarily just about how well they can play, but they're guys who know how to win, in for lack of a better term. Someone like Andre Carter, he was the heart and soul of that Army team, and I think he's the first Army player to get drafted in the past 8 years, or even longer, I think. Guys like Nolan Smith, I think like Keon White also as well. These guys are just like an injection of energy and life into the team. I mean, were there any guys that you found that kind of stuck out for that?
No, that's one thing I'm going to have to watch a lot of the Senior Bowl interviews and stuff just to see, what comes off of them. The hard part is a lot of times when these guys come in to an NFL locker room, they're not going to be listened to because they're the rookie, they're the, shut up young guy, we'll handle this and type thing. Now there are some some players out there that'll accept it and go along with it, but so no, to answer your question, no, I really didn't pay attention to any of that. I more just watched what they did on the field. I'll have to go through and look at like I said, the interviews and stuff like that to see what kind of pops out to me on that. And
yeah, I think certainly as a rookie, I don't think you'd ever expect a rookie to become a leader for their team. At the end of the day, a lot of people are like at least have 5 years on them, so it's very difficult to expect that from them. But projecting kind of down the line, and in terms of things like intangibles and like character and motor, I think it's very important. Someone like Rashawn Gary, I mean, just look at the way that he approaches the off season, his training, and the way that he plays every game. And a lot of the reason why he wins is because he's still putting in 100% effort in the fourth quarter. You know what I mean? Like he's just so relentless. And I think the more of those players that you can get, the better. And Matt LaFleur kind of famously likes a lot of those guys. That's why he liked DeGuara. He always talks about that play where there was like a pick and then DeGuara runs from the opposite side of the field and tackles him. Things like that. It's just, I think the more of these kind of like intangible things that you can get along with good players, I just think it's a really nice way to help out your team. And that's kind of why I really like Nolan Smith and Andre Carter. Smith being a smaller guy, but these are the guys that I really would love to see on this team.
Oh, there's a lot of them I'd love to see on the team that I think would inject life into it. But like I said, sometimes you got to worry about how the locker room's going to treat him. I mean, look how long it took Jair Alexander to come out of his. We knew he was flamboyant and stuff like that, but look how long it took for him to actually start showing it on the field and interjecting that stuff on the field. So it makes you wonder if some of the older guys were just saying, "Hey, young buck, calm your, slow your roll a little bit." And so it's interesting. I mean, I see what you're saying about, and going back thinking about it, Nolan, yeah. Lucas Van Ness probably could be somebody that you could do that where he was, he is a strong leader type. I'm trying to think one of the other ones. Maybe Will McDonald a little bit. I hate talking good about a Cyclone, but it happens. There's one guy that I saw that we didn't get to talk about was Brenton Cox Jr. out of Florida. I thought he was pretty good, and he could be a kind of a special player. And then, like I said, this Tarburton, like I said, I could be completely wrong on, that he's eligible this year, it's next year or whatever. But I think he could be lightning just because of how fast he was. I think, we were all talking about how Quay was this fast guy and this popper and whatever. It's the same thing I kind of saw out of this Tarburton. So I think if they could add him, that would be something special. But, it's going to be something else. I hope they do take a high character player just to get that, because we saw how the players were responding once, Jair started coming out of his shell and what these other guys were doing. So,
for sure. I 100% agree, and it's something that you do need to think about when you're building a team, right? So if you had to pick one guy that you really want to see on the Packers, you kind of maybe not like we always say, not necessarily the best player, but someone that you just really want on the Packers. Who are you picking?
If I had to choose, and it's really tough because there's so many guys that really look good, but I just with the guys that I watched, I'd have to say probably Derek Hall. I think he could be special. Whether it's he sneaks into the first round, he's there at the second round or whatever, but I really liked what I saw out of him. That if they're gonna reach, or not reach, but if they're gonna take one high, it's probably gonna be him. Because I think he also reached the measurables that the Packers like.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, he definitely has the frame that they're looking for, right? No, for sure. I think, the guy, my guy that I think the Packers could draft is Andre Carter. He kind of reminds me Joe Tryon Shoyinka, who got drafted by the Bucks. He was he had a very big frame, but not much mass, and he kind of transformed his body over the offseason. And by the time he came into the draft, he was just this massive physical freak. And, maybe we won't necessarily see that out of Andre Carter, but the fact that he just, has so much of his frame to fill out, and, there's so much for him to improve physically and kind of still in the game while still already being very skilled. I think he would be a fantastic pick, and maybe not necessarily at 15, but if we trade back or whatever, I think I'll be more than happy with Andre Carter. And the guy that I don't think will be drafted, because he's like you said, he thinks 6'1", 235. Nolan Smith out of Georgia. He's just almost like a baby Von Miller in some ways, and it's just funny because he's a smaller guy, but his biggest strength was that he was an elite run defender. I mean, among the best run defenders in all of college football this past season. And he's just such strength and power, and still being undersized. I think he will be a fantastic addition to any team. But with the measurables and the size issues, I think not an option for Green Bay most likely.
And I kind of think that with Will McDonald too, because like I said, he was. I think he just barely touched 235. I can't think of what his height is right off the top of my head, but I think he'd be off the board just because of his measurables.
So, is there anything else that you want to talk about in regards to the edge?
I think I've covered what I needed to cover on it. Like I stated earlier, there's not really anything in the free agency pool as of right now that I can say, hey, that we need to pound the table for that guy. It's really going to come down to the draft. I think a lot of things are going to come down to what the whole Rodgers situation is going to be. Are we going to have extra picks? Are we not going to have extra picks? Are we going to have Love at quarterback? Are we going to have Rodgers at quarterback? And it's another thing that I hate, throwing all these draft picks at the on the defensive side of the ball, because going through how many of them are first round picks, and we're still getting subpar defenses.
Yeah. Also, at the same time, it doesn't mean that you stop investing in defense.
No, I'm not saying that by no means. No, but
of course, yeah. But I don't think either of us think that. But I think the idea that there's already stuff in the defense, don't worry about it, figure it out. And that's just because a player was a first round draft pick doesn't mean that they were a good first round pick. And at the end of the day, you should always look to improve every single position on your roster, no matter what. I think that's kind of like I mentioned before, it's what's led to a lot of kind of roster issues with this team is that they find their starter or maybe the two stars on either side, and they kind of just settle, and they don't worry about the depth, they don't worry about guys who can fill in and also play special teams until this last year. And I think they should always be pushing, and they do that with the premier positions, like like the fact that they did draft Kingsley last year and things like that. But I would just love to see them turn position groups that are good into strengths, and find out what groups that you can rely on, and just build your identity. It's something that we didn't really have as a team. Build your identity around that. It was something that I really hope to see, and it would be very interesting because there's so many directions that they can go in. And I don't think it's possible, in this one draft to kind of address every single need. You're not going to get a starting safety, starting edge, starting defensive tackle, wide receiver, all in the same draft. That's just not possible. So for them to just kind of pick where exactly they want to plug the holes in this roster, I think will be very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like we're saying the same things every year in the draft. We got all these holes and we have we can't fill them all in the draft. So it's going to be interesting to go through the rest of these episodes and figure out what we can, as things go on and more team news comes out, to see what can possibly be when this team is formed and ready to play in September.
No, absolutely. Well, that's all from me, man. If you're happy to finish up,
we're good.
Awesome. So Brian left a little bit early, but you can find him on Twitter at Maafi, which is AABMAAFI. Myself at Nicholas GRGR, and Joe at Iowa_Joe86. Find the podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, see you later.